We're going to look today at three stories in the book of Daniel that foreshadow the development of the end-time crisis that I believe is unfolding right now in the world. Sequentially, these three stories predict the issues that will come upon the world and God's people. So let's just briefly look at these. We're not going to look at them in great detail, but we're going to start our study today by looking at these three stories. The first one is found in Daniel chapter 1. And we have spent a good bit of time in Daniel chapter 1 over the last several weeks as we have begun our study of the book of Daniel. But we see in Daniel chapter 1 that there is a great health crisis, or you could say a health test, that presents itself to Daniel and to his three friends in the court of King Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. Daniel 1 verse 5 says, "The king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might" what? Stand before the king. So here was the health test. Would Daniel and his friends eat from food sacrificed to idols? Would they eat from food that they knew was not approved by God's word, those unclean meats? Notice also in verse 5 that the purpose of this food that the king gave to them was so that they might stand before the king, before an earthly ruler. You know, Daniel and his friends, their goal was to stand before another king, wasn't it? The king of heaven, the king of the universe. And so, as a result of that, verse 8 tells us Daniel's decision and also his three friends with him. Daniel 1 verse 8 says, "But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself." A health test, and here was the decision that Daniel and his friends made. They purposed in their hearts that they would not defile themselves with the king's meat. Okay, that's the story in Daniel chapter 1. We can look next at Daniel chapter 3 as another of the great stories in the book of Daniel. And here comes another test of faith. This one a little bit closer, a little bit harder, with some greater consequences attached. Now, we're going to spend more time in Daniel chapter 3 today. In fact, we'll spend the majority of our time here, but we're just going to touch on it right now as we again begin our study. Daniel 3 verses 4 through 6 say this. Here was the test that came on Daniel's friends. "Then a herald cried aloud, 'To you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at what time you hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, you fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar the king hath set up. And whoso falleth not down and worship shall the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace.'" Daniel chapter 1, there is a health crisis or a test on health. Daniel chapter 3, that health crisis or health test becomes now a test of worship. Again, the title of our message is "From Health to Climate, the Coming Worship War." There were some dire consequences attached in Daniel chapter 3 to not doing what they were told, weren't there? This threat of being cast into a burning furnace of fire. How did Daniel's three friends respond? We find their answer in Daniel 3, beginning in verse 16. "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, 'O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up.'" What an answer. Do you want that kind of faith, that kind of commitment to God, that kind of resolute purpose in your heart, that no matter what the consequences might be, I will serve and worship God? Well, this is the test that confronted Daniel's three friends. And friends, it's the test that is going to confront all of God's people, those who would serve and worship God. The final crisis, which is fast approaching, is going to reach this place as well. We will have the same test that we need to make a decision on. A third story in the book of Daniel is found in Daniel chapter 6. Again, another famous story. This time, it's the story of Daniel in the lion's den. At this point, the kingdom of Babylon has actually passed to the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians. Daniel survives while the Babylonian king Belshazzar is slain, and now Daniel is serving Darius, the king of the Medes here. And you know the story. There is a law passed that no one can worship any man or God for 30 days except for the king. And the consequences, if you disobey this law, are to be thrown into a den of lions. Now, it's interesting when you read why they passed this law. Let's just read here in Daniel chapter 6, beginning in verse number 4. Then the presidents and princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find none occasion nor fault. Forasmuch as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. So how much error or fault could they find in Daniel? None. There was nothing. In fact, they say in verse 5, we shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God. Now you have watched, as I have in recent years, when a high-level person such as a Supreme Court justice nominee is nominated to that position. Are they just approved, and do people say, okay, let's take this nominee? Hardly. There is a thorough search through everything they have ever said, through everything they have ever done. There is no stone unturned by the political opponents of these nominees to find some kind of dirt or baggage, right, to throw against these people and to keep them from getting this position. This was kind of the process that Daniel went through, and his enemies, these jealous princes in Babylon, combed through every transaction, every business deal, every conversation that they can find in the life of Daniel, hoping to find some kind of dirt to throw against him and to remove him from power and from office. They can't find anything, can they? He was without error or without fault. I would like to suggest to you this morning, friends, that if you remain faithful to God, the time will come when your life will be searched through just as carefully as Daniel's was. And what a call it is for each one of us to live our lives today and every single day, so that if that time should come, if that opposition should come, when it does come, we can be found by God's grace without fault as well. Now, these stories took place over the course of a lifetime in Babylon. You understand, in Daniel chapter 1, Daniel was a young man, in his teens probably. By the time you reach Daniel chapter 6 and the story of the lion's den, Daniel is an old man. He's been there decades in Babylon. So these stories stretch over the course of a lifetime. However, their end-time fulfillments will happen in a greatly compressed period of time, perhaps better measured in months rather than in years. Here's another interesting statement from Early Writings, page 67. Some of us have had time to get the truth and to advance step by step, and every step we have taken has given us strength to take the next. But now time is almost finished, and what we have been years learning, they will have to learn in a few months. They will also have much to unlearn and much to learn again. Those who would not receive the mark of the beast and his image when the decree goes forth must have decision now to say, no, we will not regard the institution of the beast. Friends, we look at these stories and we think, we think about what's coming ahead. We've got plenty of time. Friends, we are told that the final events will be rapid ones, perhaps best measured in months rather than in years. Now, the mark of the beast in Revelation 13 is the final test. We're going to see how that relates to especially Daniel chapter 3 in just a moment. But let's continue our study today by looking briefly at the mark of the beast. We need to understand what this is in order to understand the issues here at the end. So keep your finger in Daniel, but let's flip over to the book of Revelation. Revelation chapter 13 warns about the mark of the beast. We read in Revelation chapter 13 and verse number 15. He had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. So we're going to see, as we continue today, a number of striking parallels between Daniel chapter 3 and Revelation chapter 13. Going on in Revelation 13, verse 16 says that he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. So here is the final test. It's the mark of the beast. And we read in Revelation chapter 16, verses 1 and 2, that the 7 last plagues are poured out on those that receive the mark of the beast. Friends, we don't want the mark. This marks the close of human probation, the decisions that people will make in connection with the mark of the beast when it falls. These are the final decisions that people will make regarding their eternal destiny. Now, there's some good news regarding the mark of the beast. In Revelation chapter 15, verse 2, John sees a group of people that have successfully maintained their faith in God. They have successfully resisted, by God's grace, the mark of the beast. Let's read about them. Revelation 15, verse 2. And I saw as it were a sea of glass mingled with fire, and them that had gotten the victory over the beast, and over his image, and over his mark, and over the number of his name, stand on the sea of glass, having the harps of God. Do you want to be part of that group, those that have victory over the beast, and his mark, and his name, and his number? I certainly do. It's possible, friends. It's possible even if the entire world be turned against you. It is possible to remain faithful to God. And this is exactly what God calls each one of us to do. He's calling you, He's calling your family, He is calling this church to remain faithful to God no matter what happens, to serve and obey Him alone. Now, there are 4 things in Revelation 15, verse 2, that this group of people have victory over. Let's look at them closely. They're boldface here on the screen. They have victory over the beast, they have victory over his image, they have victory over his mark, and they have victory over the number of his name. Friends, we're going to see that these 4 things that they have victory over correspond to the first 4 Ten Commandments. And we're going to see that the end-time attack against God and His people and the mark of the beast are directly tied to the commandments of God. We don't have to guess what the mark is. You know, there's been a lot of speculation over the course of history. What is it going to be? Is it a tattoo? Is it a barcode? Is it a vaccination? Well, the Bible tells us very clearly what the issue is. So let's look closely here. And on the screen you can see this table here that we'll build. God's people, His faithful remnant, will have victory over the beast. Revelation tells us that the beast wants to be worshiped. In fact, in Revelation chapter 13, verse 3, we read that out of one of his heads was as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. And it's made even more clear a few verses later in verse 8. And all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. So very clearly, according to the Bible here, the beast wants to be worshiped. Now the first commandment in Exodus 20 verse 3 says, "Thou shalt have how many other gods before me? Thou shalt have no other gods before me." So the beast represents an attack against God and a counterfeit against the command to worship God. The first commandment is attacked by the beast. It's counterfeited by the beast. How about the image of the beast? We were just reading from Revelation chapter 13. This image will be set up just as the image was there in Daniel chapter 3. There will be a command to worship the image. Well, the second commandment in Exodus 20 verse 4 says this: "Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven" what? Any graven images. And so the image of the beast is an attack against the second commandment. It's also a counterfeit of the second commandment and a command to worship an image. Revelation 15 verse 2 also mentions the name of the beast or the number of his name. The third commandment talks about the name of God. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Exodus 20, verse 7. Now, by the way, this can mean several things. Certainly, we should not take the Lord's name in vain in our conversation, in the words that we speak, in those expletives that are so common in the world today. But we can also take the Lord's name in vain by claiming to be a Christian, by professing to be a servant of God, but then living in a completely different way. Or sometimes living as a Christian, but then at other times living not as a Christian. Friends, we need to be careful against hypocrisy in our own lives, don't we? As Jesus said, to his disciples, to the Jews, take the plank out of your own eye, then you can see to remove the speck in your brother's eye. A good prayer that for each one of us to pray each day would be, Lord, is there any hypocrisy in my life? Am I claiming to be a Christian? Do I even believe myself that I'm a Christian, and yet are there ways in which I am taking your name in vain, taking that name of Christian in vain? So the name of the beast is an attack against the third commandment, the name of the Creator, and by claiming to be worthy of worship, it takes that name in vain as well. Well, friends, I have a question for you. If the beast is an attack and counterfeit against the first commandment, if the image of the beast is an attack and counterfeit against the second commandment, if the name of the beast is an attack against and counterfeit of the third commandment, then the mark of the beast must be what? It must be an attack against the fourth commandment and a counterfeit of the fourth commandment. Now, the fourth commandment reads this way. It begins in Exodus 20, verse 8. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. If you turn to Exodus 20, the fourth commandment gets more specific. Well, which day is the Sabbath day? We're not left to guess, are we? We're told exactly in Exodus 20, verse 9, 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work. And then verse 10 goes on and tells us, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. The Sabbath goes all the way back to creation. Genesis chapter 2 tells us that on the seventh day of creation, when God had finished all his work, he rested on the seventh day, and he blessed it, and he sanctified it. He set it aside for a special purpose. That is the day that he wants to meet with, to commune with, to interact with his creatures. He wants to communicate with you on that day. And it's the day set aside for us to worship him. The mark of the beast, clearly, friends, we can see it just from Revelation chapter 15, verse 2, centers on an attack against the fourth commandment, the Sabbath of the fourth commandment, and is a counterfeit of the fourth commandment. Now we're going to come back to that in just a moment. Now when we look in inspiration, friends, there are 4 stages of the Sunday laws that will constitute collectively the mark of the beast. The first phase of these Sunday laws will be refraining from work on Sunday. This is from Counsels to Parents, Teachers, and Students, page 550. After a time, the Sunday labor question came up for consideration. I should say this first to put it in context. Ellen White here is writing, she's in Australia, and she's writing to a Christian brother, an Adventist brother, who is asking for advice. How do we respond? There are some Sunday labor laws or anti-labor laws being put in place where we live. What should we do? This is her response. After a time, the Sunday labor question came up for consideration. It seemed as if the lines were soon to be drawn so tightly about us that we should not be able to work on Sunday. Our school was situated in the heart of the woods, far away from any village or railway station. No one was living near enough to be disturbed in any way by anything that we might do. Nevertheless, we were watched. The officers were urged to observe what we were doing on the school premises, and they did come, but they did not appear to notice those who were at work. Their confidence and respect for our people had been so won, now listen to this, had been so won by the work we had done for the sick in that community that they did not wish to interfere with our harmless labor on Sunday. Now, friends, this happened over 100 years ago, but I find it incredibly fascinating that when laws were passed to prevent people from working on Sunday, in other words, forced rest on Sunday, that God's people, at least in this location, found reprieve from oppression because of the way they had helped the sick in their community. I believe, friends, that one reason God has allowed the current pandemic in this world is to give His church, to give His people an opportunity to help those who are sick, to help those who may not know the principles of health or who may not have access to health care, who may not be allowed in a hospital even. God is giving this opportunity to make this impression, to connect with people in our communities because there is a greater crisis coming. As bad as this one has been, there is a bigger one coming, friends. And we need God's guidance in being prepared for that. So this is the first phase of the Sunday law, simply laws stating that you cannot work on Sunday. Now that will eventually morph into a command to honor and respect the Sunday Sabbath. Here's a statement from Great Controversy, page 608. As the defenders of the truth refuse to honor the Sunday Sabbath. So we see that Sunday will eventually morph from just a day of rest and forced rest. Now it will be a day to honor and to respect, to worship on. Now this statement goes on describing some of the persecution that will come, and this kind of morphs now even into the third phase of the Sunday laws, which is honoring Sunday while Sabbath worship is prohibited with fines and imprisonment. Now, I'll just go back and read this entire statement from page 608. As the defenders of the truth refuse to honor the Sunday Sabbath, some of them will be thrust into prison, some will be exiled, some will be treated as slaves. To human wisdom, this all now seems impossible, but as the restraining Spirit of God shall be withdrawn from men, and they shall be under the control of Satan, who hates the divine precepts, there will be strange developments. The heart can be very cruel when God's fear and love are removed. Another statement from page 607 of the same book, The Great Controversy, speaking of persecution in regards to refusing to honor the Sunday Sabbath. As the movement for Sunday enforcement becomes more bold and decided, the law will be invoked against commandment keepers. They will be threatened with fines and imprisonment. Some will be offered positions of influence, and others rewards and advantages as inducements to renounce their faith. And finally, in the fourth stage of the Sunday law comes a death penalty. Just like those stories in Daniel, thrown into a fiery furnace, cast into a den of lions. A death penalty will be imposed on those who worship on Sabbath and disregard Sunday. Great Controversy, again, page 615. As the Sabbath has become the special point of controversy throughout Christendom, and religious and secular authorities have combined to enforce the observance of the Sunday, the persistent refusal of a small minority to yield to the popular demand will make them objects of universal execration. It will be urged that the few who stand in opposition to an institution of the church and a law of the state ought not to be tolerated, that it is better for them to suffer than for whole nations to be thrown into confusion and lawlessness. The same argument many centuries ago was brought against Christ by the rulers of the people. It is expedient for us, said the wily Caiaphas, that one man should die for the people and that the whole nation perish not. This argument will appear conclusive, and a decree will finally be issued against those who hallow the Sabbath of the fourth commandment, denouncing them as deserving of the severest punishment, and giving the people liberty after a certain time to put them to death. So here are the four stages of the Sunday law. And let's put this all together now. In Daniel chapter 1, we see a health crisis. I believe, and we will see reasons for this in just a moment, I believe that the current health crisis in this world will eventually and soon morph into the first stage of the Sunday laws, that being refrain from working on Sunday. And again, I'll show you why I believe this, how we can see this even starting to happen in just a moment. From Daniel chapter 3, we saw that eventually a command will come to participate in false worship. We can see a parallel there with the second stage of the Sunday laws, the commands to honor Sunday as a sacred or a holy day, but still being allowed to worship on the Sabbath. And then finally, In Daniel chapter 6, we saw that a command was issued to participate in false worship and a prohibition against true worship. Remember, it wasn't just that Daniel had to worship the king, he was also not allowed to worship the God of heaven. And we can see parallels to this in the last two stages of the Sunday laws. In stage 3, the command to honor the Sunday and Sabbath worship also being prohibited with fines and imprisonment. And then in stage 4, a death penalty being imposed on those who worship on Sabbath and disregard Sunday. So my question now is, what comes next? For almost 2 years now, our world has been dealing with this pandemic, a health-related crisis. If in antitype, the world has been living now or dealing with the fulfillment or a parallel of Daniel chapter 1 and the health crisis, how do we get from there to Daniel chapter 3, commands to worship? Again, the title of our message today is From Health to Climate, the Coming Worship War. Well, friends, this health crisis will eventually become a climate crisis, and that will bring in our first stages of the Sunday law. How do we know this? Well, let's look at what's happening right now in our world. Interesting, a number of news stories are already connecting health and public health and a health crisis with climate crisis. So this is from National Geographic. Why climate change is still the greatest threat to human health. And the subtitle, Polluted Air and Steadily Rising Temperatures are linked to health effects ranging from increased heart attacks and strokes to the spread of infectious diseases and psychological trauma. That's not the only headline. This is from the Pan American Health Organization. You can see a very similar title, Climate Change and Health. And again, the subtitle, Climate Change is the biggest global health threat of the 21st century. Here is the Lancet, a respected health journal. And this is the Lancet Countdown on Health and Climate Change. You can see the title halfway down the page there. Again, the subtitle, Climate Change is the greatest global health threat facing the world in the 21st century. This is from a website called the Global Climate and Health Alliance, an urgent call for climate action from the health community ahead of COP26. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about this before we're done here. These are meetings beginning November 1st, in which world leaders will convene in Glasgow, Scotland, to move forward a climate change agenda. NPR, National Public Radio, had this headline not long ago, Climate Change is the greatest threat to public health, top medical journals warn. Now, this was published earlier this month, September 7, 2021, and they're talking about a very unique editorial article that was published in over 200 of the world's top health journals. That article was co-published by, I don't know how many, 15 to 20 editors of the largest of these health journals. And here is a screenshot from that article. The title was, A Call for Emergency Action to Limit Global Temperature Increases, Restore Biodiversity, and Protect what? Health. Here it is again. Health and climate being linked together. Now, they stated in this article, the greatest threat to global public health is the continued failure of world leaders to keep the global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees Celsius and to restore nature. Urgent society-wide changes must be made and will lead to a fairer and healthier world. We, as editors of health journals, call for governments and other leaders to act, marking 2021 as the year that the world finally changes course. There are many other such articles. Just go to the web. You can find them yourself. But friends, this move is already underway to make the jump from a health crisis to a climate crisis. And consistently in all these stories, all these articles, the push is being made. We must act now to protect ourselves, to protect our environment. Now, Pope Francis, 6 years ago now, already gave his suggested solution to protecting the environment. This is from his encyclical Laudato Si. At the end of that long encyclical, which focused on the environment and social health as well. This was his solution. On Sunday, our participation in the Eucharist has special importance. Sunday, like the Jewish Sabbath, is meant to be a day which heals our relationships with God, with ourselves, with others, and with the world. Sunday is the day of the resurrection, the first day of the new creation, whose first fruits are the Lord's risen humanity, the pledge of the final transfiguration of all created reality. It also proclaims man's eternal rest in God. Now, friends, the Bible makes it clear that there is a day that God has designated to do these things, and that day is the seventh-day Sabbath. Here is another day, the first day Sunday, that mankind is setting up in place of and as a counterfeit of God's holy day of worship. Now, why is Pope Francis suggesting Sunday, recommending Sunday? It's interesting as you look through history that it was Sunday laws back in the early Middle Ages that gave the papacy control of civil society. This is from a book called Great Empires of Prophecy, page 491, by A.T. Jones. We read there, in Constantine's Sunday law, power was given to the church to compel those who did not belong to the church and who were not subject to the jurisdiction of the church to obey the commands of the church. In the Sunday law, there was given to the church control of the civil power, so that by it she could compel those who did not belong to the church to act as though they did. The history of Constantine's time may be searched through and through, and it will be found that in nothing did he give to the church any such power except in this one thing, the Sunday law. Friends, we look in history and we find that one of the biggest things, the biggest thing, according to this statement, that gave the papacy power, that gave the Roman Catholic Church power over society in the Middle Ages was Sunday, laws protecting Sunday, and this combination of church and state together. If it was true back then, it can happen once again, friends, as the papacy is seeking to exert its influence around the world. We're going to see more of a push to protect Sunday and to have that protected by civil legislation. Now, where does this read? Where does this lead? Let's turn now to Daniel chapter 3, and we'll spend the rest of our time in Daniel chapter 3. We'll begin in verse number 1. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 80 cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar did two things. He made an image, and then he set it up. And we see here a counterfeit of God's work of creating the Sabbath and setting it up. Genesis chapter 2, verses 2 and 3 say this, and on the seventh day God ended his work which he had what? Made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it. Now, to sanctify something literally means to set it aside or to set it up as special, as unique. So God makes something and then he sets it up, because that in it he had rested from all his work which God created and made. And so we see here in Daniel chapter 3, verse 1, Nebuchadnezzar in type makes an image and he sets it up. At the end of time, the antitype will be fulfilled as mankind creates a day and sets it up and then commands the world to worship it. Now, just so we know this isn't my interpretation here, mankind has created Sunday, and even the Catholic Church admits this. You can find many statements from official Catholic publications. I picked the most recent one I could find from 1995. This was from St. Catherine Catholic Church Sentinel. Perhaps the boldest thing, the most revolutionary change the church ever did, happened in the first century. The holy day, the Sabbath, was changed from Saturday to Sunday. The day of the Lord was chosen not from any directions noted in the Scriptures, but from the church's sense of its own power. Pretty clear statement, isn't it? The Sunday was made not from biblical or from God's direction or from the Bible, but from man's sense of his own power. Here's another statement from the book The Faith of Our Fathers by Cardinal Gibbons. He says, you may read the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, and you will not find a single line authorizing the sanctification of Sunday, the setting up of Sunday. The Scriptures enforce the religious observance of Saturday, a day which we never sanctify. So friends, here's the rub. Here's the great conflict, the great controversy, the great choice that people will have to make. Will we obey God? Will we serve and worship Him on His day? Or will we obey and serve man in a day that He has set up? Daniel 3 verse 2 goes on, Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And we see here that there are leaders from all aspects of society that are gathered, right? Princes and governors, who would they be today? Well, those are our political leaders, aren't they? How about captains? That's the military. Judges, this is the judicial and the court system. There are the treasurers that were called. So here we have the economy, we have business. And then there are the counselors. Where have people turned during this pandemic to find answers, to try to find truth about what is really going on and how to protect themselves? There are two sources that people will turn to. It's either the scientists or it's either faith, it's religion. It's one of those two, right? So the counselors today would be the scientists and the religious leaders. And then Nebuchadnezzar called the sheriffs and all the rulers of the provinces. Here we have the local and regional political leaders. That pretty well sums it up, doesn't it? Everybody is called to bow down and worship this image which Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Now it's interesting. Laudato Si, that encyclical by Pope Francis, which set up Sunday as the answer, the solution to this world's problems, that encyclical was released in 2015. And just a few months ago, the papacy, the Vatican, took big steps to begin implementing with real action the principles in Laudato Si. So we have here the Laudato Si Action Platform. This was launched in May of 2021. The purpose, you can see, is to bring the whole human family together, for we know that things can change. Here's a story from crux.com. Vatican launches 7-year Laudato Si Action Plan. We will launch the Laudato Si Action Plan, which are 7 Jubilee years of concrete action, Father Augusto Zampini said. The hope, he said, is that it will create a massive movement of families, parishes, schools, and universities, health centers and hospitals, businesses, and governments. The idea is that everyone commits to the 7 Laudato Si resolutions, which are easy, and with each step, you get a credit, a Laudato Si award. Now, he didn't specify what those rewards are. Could it be the privilege of buying and selling, perhaps? We'll see as time goes on. There are 7 goals connected with this platform for action. You can see them there on the screen. The 6th one is ecological spirituality. So we need a new way of thinking about religion, a new way of thinking about spirituality as well. And again, from Crux. The reason for a 7-year plan is based on the biblical significance of the number 7. Year 1 will be dedicated to planning through community building, resource sharing, and drafting local action plans. The next 5 years will be dedicated to concrete action, while the last year will be a sabbatical year dedicated to praise and thanking God. So they've got a very definite plan. They've got a well laid out plan, even a timeline for when they hope the principles and the solutions for Laudato Si can be implemented all around the world in every aspect of society. Something else that happened actually just a few days ago, on October 4, scientists and faith leaders from all of the world's major religions gathered at the Vatican in preparation for the climate meetings happening next month. So we see here from the Catholic News Service, Pope, faith leaders urge nations at Climate Summit to care for creation. High-level representatives of the world's religions came together with Pope Francis at the Vatican to show their joint commitment to caring for the earth and to appeal to world leaders to deepen their commitments to mitigating climate change. The appeal urged world leaders who will meet at the 26th UN Climate Change Conference of Parties in Glasgow to take speedy, responsible, and shared action to safeguard, restore, and heal our wounded humanity and the home entrusted to our stewardship. Remember the wording there in Laudato Si. Pope Francis said, Sunday is the day which heals our relationships and our world. And here we have leaders from all the world's religions coming together saying, we are ready to take action to heal our world. Participants included top scientists and major religious leaders, top representatives of Christian denominations, Sunni and Shia Muslim communities, Judaism, Hinduism, Sikhism, Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, Zoroastrianism, and Jainism. That just about covers it, doesn't it, friends? Those that may say, I'm not religious, I don't believe there is any God, I don't worship at all, they'll probably fall under the atheistic mindset, which would encompass much, not all, but much of the scientific community. So friends, we see it happening here. Nebuchadnezzar is calling the world to come and bow down together. Speaking about the upcoming climate conference in November, Gallagher, Archbishop Gallagher, described the Faith and Science meeting as a no-brainer. The sense of urgency is rising, he said. More and more crises affect us, economic, social, food crises. Everything is coming together in a sort of perfect storm. Gallagher, the Vatican's equivalent of a foreign minister, said he thought that COP26 would be a key moment in the history of humanity. We will see what comes out of these meetings in a few weeks, but the hope we can see here is that it will be a turning point. Decisions will be made, action will be taken, which will shift the course of humanity. Let's go back to Daniel chapter 3. In verse 3, we read that the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces gathered together unto the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So there on the plain of Dura, Nebuchadnezzar calls the leaders of the world, and they come and they do exactly what he wanted. They stand up. In other words, they say, we will serve you. We will serve your image. We will serve your agenda. And what do we see happening in the world today? We see the same thing. Climate Sunday. If you go to the website, climatesunday.org, you will see here that many churches, I think there were 1,000 churches here in the United Kingdom, in preparation for these meetings and in an effort to consolidate their influence together, said, we're going to come together, we're going to hold some kind of a Climate Sunday in our own local churches. And not long ago, just a couple weeks ago, they had a big convention meeting. They signed documents which will be forwarded on to government leaders as well. Here's another website, the Green Sabbath Project. Is there nothing you can do about the environment? Nothing may be one of the best things you can do. One day every week, do nothing. And so we see here, again, the solution to climate problems being a Sabbath of some sort. Here's another article. Fresh Talk, the earth needs a green Sabbath. Every week we should take a day of rest. We should not shop or drive. Commerce, transportation, and construction would pause. Everyone would rest for the entire day. A weekly Earth Day could be what saves us all. Yet another one, this one from the website Tablet. The Sabbath in an era of climate change. We humans face a set of dire ecological crises, the results of what many now call the Anthropocene era, and so forth. Again, the solution, according to this article, would be take a day of rest, and guess which day is suggested? Of course, it's going to be Sunday. And then we have Faiths for Climate Change, a global multi-religious action. They are planning a big conference or convention here on October 17 and 18, so this hasn't quite happened yet. And you can see their goals here. Look on the right-hand side on Monday, October 18. Dressed in religious garb, we'll take our faiths into the streets and to our leaders' doorsteps. We'll deliver our demands to political and financial leaders, hold prayer or meditation vigils outside government and bank offices, sing hymns about the climate, or take action rooted in our deepest values. And friends, I'll be honest, this phrase in the middle of that paragraph caught my attention. Deliver our what? Demands to political leaders. And my mind went to this statement in Great Controversy, page 592. The dignitaries of church and state will unite to bribe, persuade, or compel all classes to honor the Sunday. The lack of divine authority will be supplied by oppressive enactments. Political corruption is destroying love of justice and regard for truth, and even in free America, rulers and legislators, in order to secure public favor, will yield to the popular what? The popular demand for a law enforcing Sunday observance. Liberty of conscience, which has cost so great a sacrifice, will no longer be respected. Friends, the final movements will be rapid ones. The Bible warns us about a great crisis that is soon to break upon this world. And I believe we're seeing the beginning stages of this crisis, friends. I wish we could say the pandemic will pass, things will get back to normal, but Bible prophecy says that a lot more has to happen before Jesus Christ comes back. So the question is, how do we respond? How should we as Christians respond to what is happening? I believe there are some important lessons to learn from the life of Daniel. And just briefly, as we close today, I want to look at 7 lessons that we can learn from the life of Daniel about how we can live in a time of crisis. Here is lesson number 1. Recognize that your body and your mind belong to God. In Daniel chapter 1, Daniel and his friends, teenagers in a pagan court, slaves, servants, they make a choice that they will recognize the fact that God has created them, that He is the owner of their body, and they choose to respect and honor God in terms of what they allow into their bodies. The Bible tells us in several places that our bodies are a temple in which God wants to dwell by His Holy Spirit. So step number 1, or lesson number 1, about living in a time of crisis is to recognize that our body and mind belong to God. I'm not just talking about food or even about some kind of injections, whichever side of that issue you may fall on. Friends, everything we allow into our body, whether it's through our eyes, through our ears, what we read, what we watch, what we listen to, what we allow our mind to dwell on, all of these things can either build up or tear down this body temple that God has given us in which He desires to dwell. So let us prayerfully examine our own lives and ask God to guide us and lead us in our care for this body temple. Secondly, exercise a faith that acts decisively at a moment's notice. When you look at these stories in the book of Daniel, there was not a lot of time to stop and consider, what should I do with this crisis? What should I do? I'm standing in front of a burning fiery furnace being told to bow down and worship an image. What should I do? A new law has been passed that I must worship the king or be cast to the lions. What should I do? We don't find that in the book of Daniel. They already knew what they would do, and they were ready to act at a moment's notice. Many earthly battles on the battlefield have been won or lost because of an ability or a failure to act at a moment's notice. Friends, we're in the biggest battle this universe has ever seen. We need a faith that can act decisively at a moment's notice. Here's a third lesson from the life of Daniel. We need to devote ourselves to understanding prophecy. In Daniel chapter 9, Daniel recognizes that the 70 years of captivity are just about over. And he actually says in Daniel chapter 9, verse 2, in the first year of Darius, I, Daniel, understood by books the number of the years whereof the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish 70 years in the desolations of Jerusalem. So he studies Bible's prophecy. He understands that the 70 years are about done, and he begins praying to God this beautiful prayer in Daniel chapter 9, asking God to send his people back to Jerusalem to restore the sanctuary. And as a result of that prayer, God sends the angel Gabriel to Daniel to give him understanding. And a beautiful prophecy, the 70-week prophecy, is given to Daniel. We'll study that prophecy in a few weeks. So devote yourself to understanding prophecy. And by the way, God promises when we prayerfully study his word, we can understand prophecy. We can understand his word. So we can be thankful for these promises. Claim them as you're studying the word of God, and he will answer those promises. Here's a fourth lesson. Pray and live in response to Bible prophecy. Again, we see here that Daniel didn't just understand these prophecies intellectually. They led him to action. They led him to actually do something in his life. In Daniel chapter 9, it's praying a prayer, asking for God to act, and then God sends the angel Gabriel. Daniel was not the only Bible figure, the only hero of faith that lived this way, praying and living in response to Bible prophecy. Another example would be Noah, right? God tells Noah, in 120 years, I'm going to send a flood of water upon this world. What does Noah do? Does he just sit back and say, oh, well, I'm really glad that I know this. I'll try to tell as many people as I can. Noah does tell as many people as he can, but he also takes action, doesn't he? He begins building an ark, and so he responds to Bible prophecy. What are you doing in your life in response to Bible prophecy? Is it making any practical difference in how you live your life? And if it's not, it needs to be. I'm not telling you how it should. That's God's job. Only he knows what your specific response should be. But friends, as we study this book, as we study the prophecies, it should make a practical difference, right, in our lives about how we live our life. So as you study Bible prophecy, as we're going through the book of Daniel here, ask God, Lord, what does this mean for me practically? It's a lot of information, but that information needs to become transformation in our lives. So pray that prayer as you are studying, as you are meditating on the Word of God, on these prophecies. Lord, what practical difference do you want this to make? And he will show you. Number 5, decide that the fear of man and bribery have no power over you. Right? That's what Daniel's 3 friends there on the plain of Dura, they had made the decision that bribery would not work, that the fear of man, that the fear of punishment, that the fear of death would make no difference to them. They would serve God no matter what the consequences are. And Jesus said to his disciples, do not fear those who can kill the body. Rather, fear him who can kill and destroy both the body and the soul. And this is a tough one, isn't it? We live in a world full of things to be fearful and scared of. And increasingly so, we live in a world where we are being told what to do or else. Decide that fear of man and bribery have no power over you. And friends, when God can bring us to this point, we are now living free in Christ. We are living free in God's protection, free in his power. Number 6, live, work, and serve in this world in a faultless way. We already mentioned this in Daniel chapter 6 as Daniel's enemies were looking at his life, trying to find something to pin on him. There was nothing. He was faultless and blameless in his work, in his conversation, in his, I won't say entertainment, in his recreation. Right? He never spent government money to go on a personal vacation. He never cheated on his tax returns. It would have come to light. There was nothing they could find. So we need to live and work and serve in this world in a faultless way. Ask God to help you. Lord, is there anything in my life that might not be a faithful witness of you, that might be actually making me take your name in vain as a professed Christian? And the Lord will bring these things to light, and then he will give you power to change them, power to overcome them. Finally, live every day as if it is the day of crisis. And I'm not saying to walk around in fear and trembling and being suspicious of everything and everybody, but simply keep this mindset in view. Jesus is about to come back, amen? Jesus is about to return. I want to be ready whether he comes today or tomorrow or the day after that or next year or whenever. I am living today as if this is the day of decision. And that is the secret. These are the secrets, friends, to living faithfully in a time of crisis. I want to leave you with this statement from the book, The Great Controversy, page 621. The assaults of Satan are fierce and determined. His delusions are terrible, but the Lord's eye is upon his people, and his ear listens to their cries. Their affliction is great. The flames of the furnace seem about to consume them, but the refiner will bring them forth as gold tried in the fire. God's love for his children during the period of their severest trial is as strong and tender as in the days of their sunniest prosperity. But it is needful for them to be placed in the furnace of fire. Their earthliness must be consumed, that the image of Christ may be perfectly reflected. Friends, when Daniel's 3 friends came out of that fiery furnace, the only thing that burned were the Babylonian ropes. Nothing else was touched. God desires to protect you. He promises to protect you, to lead you through faithfully whatever may happen in your life. But we have to exercise that faith in him. We have to make that decision now. Lord, whatever you allow to happen in my life, I will serve you faithfully. I will not be swayed. God is trying to consume the earthliness in each one of us. And if we're honest, there's an awful lot of worldliness and earthliness. There is in me. There is in each one of us. But God promises, if you will just entrust your life to him, he says, I will take you, weak and defective though you may be. I will burn out all that should not be there. And I will build you, I will mold you, I will shape you into somebody who reflects my image and reflects my character. God promises to do this. Are you willing? Are you ready to accept his work and to say, Lord Jesus, do whatever it takes that I may be ready for your return?